Hey, how you doing, buddy?
I could be worse, could be better. You know,
Why?
I'll think. I got a message today. Man, this is a hell of a way to open it. I got a message today. One of the people I interviewed in the Kharkiv Oblast that took part in the Kharkiv counteroffensive got killed by Russian artillery recently. That was pretty upsetting.
I'm sorry to hear that, buddy. I'm really, really sorry to hear that. This war is closer to you in many ways, isn't it? You have personal connections to what's going on.
Yeah, I try to not thankfully. I don't know how to phrase this correctly. I wasn't super close with this guy, but I interviewed him once. I went to a school in the Kharkiv, in the city of Kharkiv that had been bombed out. It had a playground that had been bombed by a Russian missile, and I was interviewing him about the city and the Kharkiv counteroffensive that was ongoing. But he was really, really good friends with a lot of people that I know. I know a really good aid worker in the area by the name of Igor that I know he's good friends with. So I'm upset because he was a nice guy when I got to meet him. The little bit I did get to know him, and anytime anybody I film with or document gets hurt, I feel in some way connected to it because, I documented that person. I filmed them. They gave me that type of trust to film them and trust me with their testimony. So it's always not good when something like that happens. But war is war. Men die in war. It's the sad truth.
What do you do to cope with that being? Because I'm trying to be like you, bro. I'm trying to get out there more and get involved. How do you cope with it, at the end of the day and you keep going, when you meet these people personally and you get involved with them, you hear their story, and then, you got to do your journalism job too. What do you do to cope with that?
How do I cope with it? Man, that's a hell of an opening question. How do I cope with people dying? It's difficult because I think no matter what, you can't completely get rid of the blows of people like getting killed. There's no like magic solution to make you not feel pain or hurt when that type of stuff happens. So you just kind of have to feel that pain and hurt. I think the fastest way to deal with it is to feel the pain, feel as much of it as quick as you can. Not as quick, but to process it as normally. Don't push it off. I don't do that though, personally. I usually just stay concentrated on my work and kind of distract myself from it. That's what's helped me personally, even though it's probably not the healthiest. It allows me to keep focused on work, and I've used work to distract myself. But I do think that it's important to just feel the pain to at least some degree. You gotta let off the pressure valve, or you're gonna break.
100%, dude. Like at least a little bit, and I do sometimes feel the pressure. Because if you, let's actually do some introductions. We just started right away, but this is kind of how it went on our Good Morning Kyiv discussion that we had on my YouTube channel. So you're new to my stream here at this time of night, and I might have some viewers that don't know who you are. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself really quick for viewers that might not know who the hell you are.
Sure. My name's Dylan Burns. I'm a freelance journalist from the United States, from Maryland, the best state in the union, of course. I came to Ukraine in order to document the war. This is my second time in Ukraine. I came last year for a few months, and I'm here for about half of the year. I spent half the year in Ukraine, then go back for the winter, then I come back. That's my current cycle. I filmed a bunch of different stuff in the country. I've lived with demining crews and filmed with them for about a month. I filmed forward operating positions. I filmed with evacuation crews, hospital crews, aid delivery crews. I've filmed in most major oblasts where fighting is going on. I've been trying to cover the war from as many aspects as possible and get as many perspectives of the people who are fighting this or dealing with the war firsthand. I try to collect as much testimony as possible. My basic principle is to document as much as possible and document the human aspect of it, because I feel like that isn't covered as much as it should be.
You're doing a fantastic job of that. Very, very, very good work. What are you doing now in Ukraine at this point?
Well, right now I'm preparing to release that report I talked to you about when I was actually on Good Morning Kyiv, the Kherson, the report about the shelling targeting of aid workers in Kherson. I just got the first draft back. I'm really happy with how it looks. That's going to be released in the near future. I got an article releasing on Monday, an interview with a displaced person from Crimea who was displaced when they were a child and then grew up in Germany and has now come back and has joined the armed forces to try to retake their home. I'm going to be publishing that interview on Monday. But as for stuff I'm going to be going out and filming, because I got a bunch of stuff just working on editing that I'm going to publish, interviews with foreign legionnaires. I have an interview with a Kraken commander who took part in the Kharkiv counteroffensive I'm going to be releasing in the next few months. It was a really good interview. I'm really excited for that. But for stuff I'm going to be filming, I'm going to be hopefully I'm going to be filming some medical evac with the 3rd Assault Brigade, possibly. Yeah. I got a fixer who said he could get me that, but I'm still waiting for confirmation, so that's still up in the air. I'm got some aid delivery I still want to film. I might be going down to Odessa to talk to hospital crews. I really want to concentrate on stabilization points and doctors and field staff and hospitals right now. I'm really interested in that, in the medical process, because there's not a lot of attention given to how strained a lot of these medical staff and medics are, because they're incredibly strained. The two groups of people I found in the country that are the most strained are demining crews and hospital staff and hospital workers.
And can you speak more on what is needed for the demining? Because I'm going to try to pull up a photo. Can I share that photo that you sent me of you?
Sure, yeah, that's a public photo. Yeah.
Okay, I'll post that in Discord really quick while you talk. And also I'll introduce myself to your stream too in a second, because I pulled up your chat on Twitch and I see a couple comments like, who the hell is this guy? So I haven't really been active on Twitch, but talk about the importance of demining while I pull that photo up really quick.
Sure. So I lived with demining crews in the Kharkiv Oblast for a month to film what it was like, just what their daily lives were like, what type of work they did, how it affected them personally and emotionally, their family lives, stuff like that. And what I found from my conversations with them is that I think that most people have no clue how gigantic the problem is. The Ukrainian environmental minister said that Ukraine is probably the most mined country on the planet, with 1/3 of the country covered in mines. And they are facing a ton of shortages in a lot of really, really important categories. Demining vehicles is one of the clearest. They have about 20 demining vehicles, I think, in the country. And they've just right now, I think, approved or certified a factory in Kharkiv to produce 2 a month. But they're going to need much more demining vehicles, and these are really expensive. They're not easy to fundraise because these things cost sometimes millions upon millions of dollars. So it's not like something it's not like tourniquets where you're like, oh, we're gonna fundraise 5,000 tourniquets. It's very expensive gear. Another thing that I think is desperately needed is better body armor, better equipment to protect the deminers themselves. Drones. Every demining crew that I met used drones, and they used them heavily to spot the mines from a distance. And I think drones are, from at least my experience, an essential part of a demining crew's tool belt. But most people don't think of them using drones to spot the mines. But by spotting the mines from a distance away, you can help protect the deminers and help keep them safe so they know what they're going into. There is not a type of equipment that is necessary for demining that they don't need more of. Yep. Not to mention the fact that the people who are doing this work are given relatively I'm not going to say that there's no training or they're thrown in there with no experience, but they go through a crash course 1-month program where it used to be 3 months. And in the West, or in the United States, for example, it would be much longer. Now they basically have a month to learn how to demine Mon 50s, butterfly mines, TM62s, anti-tank mines, anti-personnel mines of all types of different stripes. Obviously a month to learn that much is pretty crazy, because I lived with them for a month and I tried to pick up as much as I could. And obviously I wasn't in a training course, but that's a short period of time. But that's just
overwhelming.
That's how strained they are. There's about 3,000 active, I think, SESU deminers, and maybe 2,000 more in training, or 2,000 more that could be going out there and doing work, but they also just don't have the equipment for them. So they need equipment across the board that I think that the United States and other Western allies should be providing Ukraine more of. Definitely, if we're going to be giving them the cluster munitions, which are going to have duds in those weapons that are deployed out in their field. So they desperately need all types of demining equipment.
All sorts of it. So both the equipment and then the training around it too. It sounds like the training needs to be expanded upon as well, if possible. But they don't really.
They just don't have the time to sit down and train.
I literally was just gonna say that. What is the timeline too? Because it's got to be in order to advance, you're gonna have to demine, right? Every single advancement every new village liberated, demining, a big demining process goes into that.
It's an extremely time intensive process. There's a reason why the estimates are like 80 to 100 years, 110 years for how long it's going to take to actually clean out all these minefields. I was with them for a month, and in the area that they were clearing when I was with them, which was these power lines that were needed to power a local village that the Russians had mined before they left, and they needed to dismantle those mines so they could power the local village. They didn't even finish just that area of the power lines by the time I had left, because of how time intensive and how slow you have to be and have multiple people going over the same spots to make sure you really got it cleared. It's extremely time intensive work, which is why the more equipment they get, the better, because things like demining vehicles can speed up the process exponentially. I've only saw a demining vehicle used once, and it cleared a lot of territory very quickly. A lot of butterfly mines very quickly that were very close to civilian homes. Actually, I think about 20 feet from civilian homes that actively had people in them.
Wow. Just terrorism. Just the Russians have no bounds to their terrorist acts. Have the Mikliks helped at all? Have the line charges, have those been used, or do you know anything about the
ones that I noticed that people really like are the one, there's these ones produced in Kharkiv that double as both kind of like batteries that you can charge and then use to charge your phone, like those, what I'm talking about, like a power charger, like a power block, and it also doubles as a charge to set off those explosives. I filmed a lot of those. That was the one really fun part of the job, I gotta say. Yeah. We're blowing up the explosives, which that's just my like caveman dumb male brain, like explosion. Yeah, that was the one part that everyone seemed to enjoy.
That's got to be why EOD guys like it. They get to do the boom. Yeah,
explosions are cool. I mean, it's still like that work can still be dangerous. Like we'd still get like covered. Like it would still, if you do it properly though, you should be fine, and then you can kind of just film it and edit it and have fun with it. But that was the one time that I think everybody did get to have fun. The rest of it is extremely stressful work. Something I noticed in demining, and this is true in most of the Ukrainian military, even though they don't drink on the job. Obviously, nobody drinks on the job. And if anybody did, I would never say that they did. There's a big drinking culture in demining crews. It's an extremely stressful job, and I wonder how much of it is due to enjoyment of just like being with your buddies, and how much of it is like trying to deal with the fact that every day you're going back and out into those minefields. And while I was out there, I think they lost, in the Kharkiv Oblast, in just the time I was there, like 3 or 4 people died and 7 were injured from booby-trapped mines where the Russians had jerry-rigged them in a way where when you removed it, it would explode like 4 or 5 other mines to kill deminers specifically. And many of the deminers, I know that during that time too, 60 miners were killed in shelling in Kherson after they were targeted by the Russian military. So it's incredibly dangerous work. So it's extremely stressful. And most of these people are like family people. They're like family men. I think some people have like maybe an image of their head of like the soldier of like, I don't know, this image of like, he's a young 18, 19-year-old, hasn't really started his life. Many of these people are like 35, 37, 38, wife and kids, working in these other careers, but once the war happened, they wanted to contribute or felt like they had to contribute, or they used to be deminers and they had to get back into it once the war started.
So they did it in the old war, and then they came back and did it in the full-scale invasion?
Yeah. I've met some people who were working in 2014, 2015 doing this type of work. Others were soldiers, and then they learned to do demining because they knew that was needed, and that was a good way that they could help. Some people can't do frontline service anymore because they were injured in some way, and so this is another way they can contribute. If they can't like do a ton of running, they can take they can do the meticulous process of kind of clearing minefields.
What's like the work cycle around that? Are they out there putting in many hours, or do you know about that?
It depends. Sometimes it'll be like 8, 9, 10 hours out in the minefields, just clearing mines. Other times it'll be much shorter. The weather will have an effect on it. It'll depend on, if they have a bunch of meetings or they have some like training thing that they have to do. But it really depends on how much they have to clear, what they're clearing, what the weather's like. But it was relatively a range of like 5 to 9 hours probably of how long they were out in the minefields every day.
Wow. and they're also, while they're demining, artillery's coming in too, right? It's not like it's a perfect situation.
Well, there was shelling and like missile strikes on the Kharkiv city, but we were like out in the countryside more. We were in one of the smaller cities, and there was one missile strike in the city, I think, while we were there. So there wasn't much shelling that they had to deal with. Most of the threat posed to local civilians while we were there were from mines, and a lot of animals too. We actually did stumble on like dogs that were killed by like Mon 50 mines, butterfly mines that left behind by the Russians. That's actually you would just kind of be in the minefield, just walking around filming, and you'd hear explosion probably like half a mile away or like a quarter of a mile away, and it would be like just some animal that set off a bomb. And that's how a lot of people find out that their communities are mined or their forests near their homes are mined, is because the animals end up setting it off.
Horrible, fucking absolutely horrible. How did you get started? How did your interest start with Ukraine and getting involved in journalism with the Russian invasion of Ukraine?
I think I always had some interest in journalism, or at least expressing opinions or trying to cover foreign policy. I had advised some candidates on the issue of foreign policy. I think the first time I really did journalism, even if I didn't consider myself a journalist, I just considered myself a streamer at the time, is probably when I was at January 6th. I was there on the ground, streaming everything and documenting everything. I'm from the DC area. I'm from the DMV. I was born and raised in the DMV. So for me, it was just like taking a 30-minute train to the place that I had, my grandfather worked at for my entire time growing up. It was just like I was walking into my community. And so for me, it was a lot more nonchalant than I treated it a lot more nonchalantly than the day ended up being. I treated it so nonchalantly. I went there in a Biden hoodie. And we're just walking around, having people like spit at me,
that's fucking awesome,
and yell at me, and like get so angry. And it was a terrible day, but I was also having a few moments of fun too in it, because it'd be like people would be like, "How dare you vote for that traitor?" And I would be like, "Look at these people. Do you live here? You came to what are you guys, Antifa? You're rioting." I like just messing with them a little bit, but I didn't want to provoke them too much because those guys were violent.
I'm just shook Biden had hoodies. Like, that's what the most surprising thing of that is.
He had some decent merch. This time I think the merch game has improved even more, but I liked the hoodie the most. It was good. It was a really nice quality hoodie. I wish
did it just say Biden 24 on there or something simple?
Yeah, it just said like Biden 2020. Yeah.
Or 2020, I mean. 20, yeah, my mind's already on the next one. Yeah, 2020 on there. My goodness.
Yeah, I remember the one thing I will say was strange about January 6th, or something, a really ironic moment I remember, and I don't know if any other news outlet has covered this, but this is what I saw. I remember when they attacked the journalists. I was actually there for that. You remember when they smashed all the journalists' cameras? Yep. I remember what provoked them to do that. So what happened is there was I think a European outlet. I think it might have been a Turkish outlet, or maybe DW. I forget. They had like a blue mic, and I remember DW has the blue mics. They were speaking into the camera, and they said something like, "Behind me is a riot." They said something along those lines because they were storming the Capitol. They were rioting.
Yeah.
And then somebody got angry, and they were like, "How dare you, fake news, riot, I'm fucking not rioting." And he takes the flag, and he starts waving it in front of the camera, like, "USA, USA, USA." And then other people like see the commotion, and they see he's confronting the fake news, and they're like, "Fake news, It's like, those movies, those zombie movies, when people cover themselves in guts, but eventually the zombies find out. That's what it felt like. They all started like lumbering over, and first it was like they threw a water bottle, then they were throwing like harder, like smaller objects, and then before you know it, they were tearing down this like gate that divided them from the journalists. They forced them all out and then smashed their cameras. So the reason they smashed all their cameras and rioted was because they were called rioters.
So just for the simple fact of being called what they were, the sensitivity and the snowflake energy really shows where it comes from, right?
Yeah, it was after that. It was shortly after that I left because it was getting late. It was super cold, and I was like, okay, this is not the vibe. I'm out of here.
Hell nah. So it sounds like your origins, and so that's what started. Did you start streaming then, or did you stream before then?
I started streaming in 2020. I started streaming when I was 18. Actually, that was about.
Oh wow.
Yep. First year of 2020, I started streaming when I was 18 years old. I've been doing this for almost 5 years now.
Bro, you were 18 in 2020?
Yep.
That's when I started too as well. I started during the BLM protests and then the riots in Minneapolis here. So
we gotta have a very similar start in a way. I mean, at least for the journalism angle, at least.
You got a little further though than right now, because you're in Kyiv, like going to the front lines and shit. But we kind of have like a parallel. I didn't make it to January 6th though, because the week before I had kind of known some of the Chud streamers as well. Like I just kind of knew who they were, and also just one of them specifically who was a streamer for BLM, and then he like I kind of knew this guy personally, and then he like immediately went full right-wing Chud, and like there's a whole other problems in there as well. My chat will know who I'm talking about, but it is what it is. He started streaming the Stop the Steal events and everything in DC. And so like I had seen the night where they had went and took the flag, to the BLM flag off the church and like burned it, and they were like, dudes got stabbed and shit out there. And I'm like, oh man, I don't know if I want to go to this. Like I
was actually at one of the stabbings. Actually,
it was the couple days prior to January 6th.
It was a Million MAGA march. It was during the nighttime after curfew, and I stayed out because of course I did. And the Proud Boys were really, really aggressive the whole night. They were just looking for a fight. And it was very clear they were looking for a fight. Anytime they saw anything that looked vaguely like a crowd of people that, that could vaguely be considered Antifa, they'd like charge at them. And they charged at the group that I was with like multiple times. And eventually it did lead to like a girl getting stabbed in the arm. And I saw her like pull. And it was weird because when she got stabbed, I don't even think she realized it. Because when she pulled up her arm to like look at what happened, she saw the wound and then the pain kicked in. That the adrenaline was pumping that she didn't even know till afterwards. But the relationship with the cops on the ground was so bad because they were just doing very little to actually prevent violence that she wouldn't even go to the cops for medical attention.
What the fuck? Just because of the situation and the climate, it was getting, at that point I was getting dangerous. Like when I started my journalism out here walking the streets, I had just normal shit on. I mean, it's sitting back there. I had like I didn't even have a gas mask, but by the time January 6th time came around, I had bulletproof, I had a vest on, and I had full everything, you want
to know what I wore there?
What'd you wear that one?
Biden hoodie.
Just the Biden hoodie.
Biden hoodie. I got my gang colors, man.
That's such an awesome troll because, again, number one, I had no idea Biden had merch.
That's why I do it, because I'm interested to see how people react to just like, it's the most milquetoast. It just says like Biden, right? And the Trump guys, they wear their gear constantly, right? I'm not
exactly.
I'm not like a super duper Biden fan. I'm voting for the guy. That's the guy I'm voting for. He wasn't my guy in the primary, but he's the best option. I think he's better on labor issues. He's better on certain issues that I care about.
Oh yeah.
But since the Trump guys are always just so passionate about it, I'm just interested if they just saw the like slightest amount of like, yay, Biden, like how would they react to it? And every time in those types of events, it's you'd think that I have like a picture that says I love Jeffrey Epstein on my shirt, like by the type of reactions that I get sometimes. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I remember once like somebody saw it at January 6th. Somebody came up to me with a sign that said the punishment for treason is death, and she was like, learn this, as she pointed at me.
Trying to cast some spells coming your way, probably, huh?
Yeah, witchcraft.
Some witchcraft. Literally some witchcraft.
Yeah, you've been playing Baldur's Gate. She's the hag mission. Have you? Yeah.
I just did that one too. Ironically, literally today. So chat will know exactly what we're talking about. Oh, how do you feel Biden's doing in Ukraine?
I mean, I think he's doing better than I think a lot of other Democratic candidates would have done if they were in his position, which I think we got kind of lucky on that. I still think he dragged his feet on shipments, whether it has to do with Western tank shipments, whether we have it happening right now with the ATACMS missiles, whether it was getting crews trained on F-16s. If they got crews trained on F-16s, or they started training crews back in, let's say, like in May of last year or something, like a lot earlier on, even if it was just in secret, because I know they that could have vastly sped up the process. But there was just so much concern about what would the Russians do and escalation that never really amounted to anything, that I think the Russians were able to, even if they weren't able to stop the aid, they were able to at least effectively delay the aid through their saber rattling. So I would say that would be my main thing that I would fault Biden for, is I think being a little too reactive to the saber rattling.
Yeah, way too. It's too much. I feel like this is dragging out due to Western governments being lulling on it and sending aid too little, too slow. I mean, I even talked to guys that are on the front lines out there, and the equipment that they're getting is broken sometimes. Like doorknobs are broken, door hinges aren't coming complete because they don't get replacement equipment either, along with the shipments.
With the Germans just confirmed, I think, 50 Leopard 1 tanks to the Ukrainians. 20 of them are just not even going to work. They're just going to be scrapped for spare parts. A lot of the gear that they're getting is bottom shelf gear, which I think a lot of people don't know that when they're talking about these aid shipments, because the way we accounted for aid and we talked about the aid we sent is very deceptive. I remember the double counting of aid where they would not only count the aid that we sent, but they would also cover the replacement costs. I don't know how you're going to say to buy a new tank to be used in the American military could possibly be included as aid to Ukraine if the Ukrainians don't get it. I think that to me, that's ridiculous. And most Americans aren't going to know that when they hear that number. If they hear that we sent $20 billion worth of tanks over, they're going to think we sent 20 billion, not that we sent 10 and then bought 10 as a replacement. And so when somebody hears we sent 20 billion and then they failed to do that, I think it's going to have a different impact if they heard we sent 10 billion. And so I think
I can speak. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. You wanted to comment?
Yeah. I was just going to say, you're speaking perfectly on that. And I can speak personally to that. I served in the U.S. Army, and, I have awards that were given for being responsible for millions of dollars worth of equipment. It says on there, Specialist Mercado was responsible and kept track of $18 million of U.S. equipment. Now, does that mean I personally handled $18 million of Uncle Sam's money? No, it's the dollar value representing the equipment that I had, underneath my charge that I was responsible for. It wasn't a dollar amount. And that's a lot of that too, is what's being valued as when we show a dollar amount of how much we've sent to Ukraine, it's often just representative of the equipment being attached to that.
That's true. That actually reminds me of another thing that I was always angry about. People would include the original construction costs of the equipment, like how much it was worth when it was originally made, not what it was worth when we actually gave it to them. So let's, for example, the Vietnam era troop carriers we gave, the M113s, I think they're called. Those things are like 50, 60 years old. They've been out of production since like 2007. We're trying to replace them anyway. If you include the original construction cost for that instead of what it's worth now, that's going to be a drastic difference in what that actually is accounted as and how much aid we've given the Ukrainians. I think that when we send that type of aid over, we shouldn't count it as what it cost when we made it, but how much it was valued when we sent it over.
100% too. What do you feel about the people propagandizing the accounting errors? I feel it's a good thing, if we overvalued how much and we were spending less amount of money than what we thought we were.
I mean, that brings back to, it was the idea of them, double counting it. We're counting replacement costs and we're counting the stuff we shipped over. I don't know if we would call it if it was legitimately just like an error their part, or if they were doing it to make them look like they were helping Ukraine more than they actually were, or like what the motivation was behind it. Doesn't matter either way. Correcting it was the right thing to do. Because if I told anybody I'm going to give them $20 billion worth of, if I told you that, or anybody watching today, that I'm going to give you a $30,000 car, that I'm going to sell this $30,000 car to you, then it comes to you with a $15,000 car, and it's like, oh no, you don't understand. I needed to also buy a new car for me. Thank you for covering that. I appreciate it. Everybody would say that's absolutely ridiculous. Applying those standards to aid, or at least when we talk to the public about aid, I think is silly. If you had a bunch of aid professionals in like a conference room, and that's how they talked about it in the conference room, like what would be the overall cost of it, that's one thing. But when you're talking to everyday people, you need to talk to them in a way that they're going to understand that isn't misleading. And when you talk to these people who are saying $200-300 billion we sent over, it's meant to be purposefully misleading in order to catch you with a headline.
And that's oftentimes the case. They just get away with saying any type of a number, even if it's not even the correct one. And I have conversations with this.
What RFK said?
Oh my God,
$1.8 trillion, man.
Yeah, trillion.
Dude, where are the Ukrainian mechs, man? The Ukrainian like spider tanks and like Superman over here. Where's Spider-Man?
literally, we're Iron Man out there, dude. Something like you got the Wakanda armor or something out there. Apparently, I don't know. Especially since it's like that people that track the war can see, common sense, the gear and weaponry that's out there, and damn well like the trillions aren't being spent out there with what we're seeing out there. It's insane. Like
No, I mean, I'll see World War II guns in service. I'll see guns. I remember seeing I forget what it's called, but it has a drum magazine on the top. It was the first time I ever went to forward operating position. It was a time that I got chased by a Russian drone. But we went to the forward operating position, and it was World War II era machine guns being used by territorial defense. How is you going to spend $1.8 trillion and they're using World War II era machine guns?
Exactly. It's more of the same garbage narratives. That's why it's like I feel like Robert F. Kennedy is just like a plant, honestly, or something. In my opinion, I mean, he just repeats Russian propaganda talking points, like every single one regarding Ukraine.
It's hard to know exactly like where people's loyalties lie when I hear these types of things.
God.
Because when I hear Tucker Carlson talk about the war, I'm also thinking about where his loyalties lie. Because Tucker Carlson, and we talked about this last time I was on Good Morning Kiev, him, RFK, there's so many different commentators who constantly pump out misinformation about the war. And when I listen to them, it's hard to know if this is something they genuinely believe, if this is that, they were paid off by somebody, or if it's being contrarian for contrarian's sake for attention. I think a lot of them is that last one. I think a lot of them is contrarian for contrarian's sake. They need to have the alternative, secret, cool, like opinion that so they can be like.
There's some money in that. People just want to be against the grain just to be against the grain, right?
Absolutely. You see it all the time. You see it all the time online. People being against the grain just to be against the grain. I think that's where a lot of conspiracy theories come from. Is just, honestly wanting to be a special snowflake. You want to live in your own little Tom Clancy novel, and it's pretty boring if you get the boring, simple answer as to what's going on in Ukraine instead of the money laundering, Satanist, sex trafficking, Hunter Biden prostitute
Nazis.
ring. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Banderite gay Nazi ring. Yeah.
Yeah. The Tom Clancy novel, the Tom Clancy syndrome people that you said.
Yeah. Tom Clancy syndrome. Yes. I love that. I love that phrase.
That's amazing. I've adopted that, by the way. I credit you though for it, for giving it to me at least. It's awesome.
I stole it from someone else, but I'll take the credit anyway.
All right, you can pass it down because like it's horrible. It's like even the Maui situation. Like I want to cover that, but it's like it's already been spun into propaganda narrative so much right now, where it's like, well, we could be, and it's always this. It's always, well, we could be aiding Maui, but the money to Ukraine, and it's like, what the fuck? Every single thing now. Every single narrative now is getting spun into, well, we could be aiding this, but Ukraine.
I remember I was talking about aid shipments to Ukraine recently in some Twitter post, and I got this response that was along the lines of, wow, we're sending cluster munitions to Ukraine, but what are we sending to Flint, Michigan? And I was like, you know what? You're right. We should drop the cluster munitions on Flint, Michigan. That's what they really need to save their city. Cluster munitions. I think a lot of people I think assume that what is happening is that Joe Biden is sitting on like a giant brick of money, and then he's like, I want to give some of this brick of money to Ukraine, and then he sends it over. Ukraine takes 90% off the top and puts it into Zelensky's Coke supply or whatever the fantasy is, and then maybe a tiny bit will dribble into food supplies. What's actually happening is they're taking a bunch of different things that are valued differently. Some of them are old equipment, some of it's newer equipment, but it's military gear that's being sent over that you can't really skin the top off of a Bradley. You can't really skin the top off of an Abrams. The type of corruption that's happening in Ukraine and that I've heard about firsthand, it's a lot more it's a lot more of it's with developmental problems, for example, rebuilding efforts. A lot more of it is going to be a lot more petty corruption, like a box of grenades here going missing or a box of grenades here going missing. So when people talk about these money laundering conspiracies, stuff like that, not only is it not true, it's just not even physically plausible or possible. It's pretty hard to money launder a tank.
It's just things that aren't happening at all. It's the narratives that they're coming up with. It's a new one every single week. Before I went live, I kind of heard you cooking on old Ramaswamy.
The tech bro.
Yeah, the tech bro politician who's running. Who's got some anti-Ukraine bot number 7 opinions like the rest of them do. What do you think of Vivek? Because I got some viewers. I got some. I'm gonna be honest. I got Republican viewers, but they obviously kind of feel not at home anymore due to 45. So they're probably looking elsewhere. What do you think?
I think we need a total and complete shutdown of people in Silicon Valley running for political office until we can figure out what the hell is going on with these tech bros running for office, or political tech bros. I think there is something about the tech pro mentality where you just feel like, you know, you've fixed a few coding issues, or you've made like a cool invention, and so now you can fix all of the world's issues. It's the same thing when I see with, like, for example, it's the same critique I make of Jordan Peterson, where Jordan Peterson, he actually knows what he's talking about, and it was like some of the books that he's written about, like, actual, like, psychological, like, make your bed type stuff. But then he'll take that and he'll try to apply it to completely unrelated fields, like the war in Ukraine, and he'll completely butcher everything. I remember once I was watching him, and he was saying very smugly, like, "No, none of you guys knew about Ukraine before this. Did you know about the Holodomor before this?" He was trying to say Holodomor. He didn't even know how to, like, say it. He said he called it the Holodomor. And
the Holodomor.
The Holodomor. And
what the fuck?
And I think it's just this feeling that they can solve all the world's problems through, like, through the same kind of, like, Silicon Valley, like, business tech startup method. And that's what it sounds like when I listen to Vivek Ramaswamy talking about how he wants to basically repeat what Nixon did with China, with Russia. I think it comes with a complete lack of historical understanding. There's no Sino-Soviet split that Joe Biden could even try to capitalize on. What type of compromises would that mean making on behalf of Europe, where we'd say, okay, you can have the Baltics, or we'll remove our nuclear umbrella, or fine, you can have Ukraine, you can do this, you can do that. How will the Europeans react to it? We need the European support if we're ever going to get them to agree to any type of sanctions on China on any number of issues. Why would the Germans agree to do anything to target, for example, the Chinese tech sector, which we're terrified of in the United States? At least the administration is terrified of, both Republican and Democrat. How are we going to get them to agree to that if we are not even showing any commitment to our allies in Europe? And we're telling them, send all this aid to Ukraine. Never mind, we're ditching them. You know those Leopard tanks you sent? We're going to embarrass you, and we're just going to completely sell out the Ukrainians. But also, please undercut your economy, which is currently in recession, to fight the Chinese for no reason. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me.
It's dog shit foreign policy too, and it's why I'm like kind of myself in the corner for. I'm leaning Biden already, just because it's not, even though it's not a perfect policy, and obviously his dripping of aid to Ukraine's annoying, but he's at least dripping the aid. You know, it doesn't look like any other candidates have Ukraine in mind at all. Maybe Chris. Go ahead.
The sad reality, and this scares me, and I don't think this would even be true of a Chris Christie administration, even though that's not going to happen. It'd be funny if Chris Christie won the primary, though, because he has been embarrassing Trump. Is that whatever Republican president got elected, no matter who it is going to be somewhat reliant upon the Freedom Caucus and Republicans to get their agenda through. If they want to pass tax reform, they're going to need those votes, because the Democrats are not going to vote to lower taxes on the businesses that they want to lower taxes on. They're not going to vote in favor of the deregulation in the FDA or other, or for example, going for the right to work laws. It's just not part of their agenda. And so if they want to do that, if he wants to do that, he's going to have a tight ship. Definitely if the margins in the House or Senate are similar to what they are now, because that's what Joe Biden had to do to get things like the Infrastructure Act passed. And so that means a very small collective of Republicans could potentially dislodge whatever the Republican president's plans are very quickly by just saying, like, nah, unless you compromise with me on this, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to vote in favor of it. They can stall it. And they've shown through their interactions with Kevin McCarthy, like Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene and all these other, well, not Marjorie Taylor Greene, but Matt Gaetz and many members of the Freedom Caucus, kind of poo-pooing Kevin McCarthy's ascension to the House Majority Leader's position, that they are willing to do that. So I don't think it is that impossible to imagine Matt Gaetz, maybe Andy Harris now, because we saw that recent report from Politico with Andy Harris saying, look, we're not going to vote for this budget reconciliation or whatever this is unless you promise to cut aid to Ukraine, unless you promise to stop wasting the money in Kiev. And then that president would be reliant on their votes to get their agenda passed. And so it would be a question on how steely are they to say to them, no, I am willing to lose your votes on this issue, on this tax reform or whatever it is, in order to protect Ukraine. Maybe Nikki Haley would do that because of her history in foreign policy, maybe Mike Pence would do that, but all these people are unlikely candidates. It's most likely going to be Trump, and if it's not Trump, maybe DeSantis. But I mean, he's crashing and burning. So it's not as simple as even if they support Ukraine, therefore they're safe. If they reliant upon people who don't support Ukraine to get their legislation through, that can end up undermining them.
How important is the 2024 election coming up for aid for Ukraine in general?
Absolutely, tremendously important. The president has immense power over what type of budget they're going to be putting forward, how much they are asking for Ukraine, how they can use the executive office, which does have a lot of authority when it comes to foreign policy, to try to get more aid and more funding over to Ukraine. It is unbelievably extremely important. I mean, we can even look at it from the perspective of stuff even that isn't in the power of the president could potentially just be used to slow roll aid. Remember how Trump withheld aid from Ukraine so he could try to strong arm Zelensky out of information about Hunter Biden,
100%,
and whatever lewd photographs they wanted to publish about him for the 30th or 40th time.
More Hunter Biden cock, please.
They're gonna release a. I'm waiting for like Rand Paul to release a book. It's like the full Hunter Biden breakdown is gonna be like 300 different angles of his penis. But yeah, I really do not trust any Republican administration on Ukraine. I trust certain Republican congressmen on Ukraine, as in I trust that they're going to vote in favor of aid. I don't trust any Republican administration, even if the person in question is pro-Ukraine, just because of the people that they're stuck with in their party.
Yeah. It seems like they're in a swamp, if you will, kind of a swamp situation, ironically. What are you looking at now with the counteroffensive? We can talk about that for a bit here. How long have you been going on your stream, dude? This dude, hey, by the way, both chats, Dylan did his whole stream the night he came on our morning show and then came on our show for like an hour or 2 hours. So he did like 9-10 hours straight that night. Yeah. You're a champ. You're a champ for this. If you guys haven't, go ahead.
Don't tell my community that, because they're gonna remind me of how many streams I've missed. How many streams they're gonna drag me through the mud on that. For the counteroffensive, I obviously wish it was going faster. Everybody wishes it was going faster. I wish it was going like the Kharkiv counteroffensive, but this was never going to be like the Kharkiv counteroffensive. If you listen to the people who knew what they were talking about beforehand, and not just like the random Twitter threads from the people with like 20 numbers in their name, right? They were they were generally saying that this is going to probably look a lot closer to the counteroffensive in Kherson, where it's going to be very slow progress until maybe the Russians are degraded to a point where they break, and then the Ukrainians are going to try to flood wherever that break is with as many troops as possible to try to take over the land bridge. At least that was the idea. They have taken some villages, but they have not taken as many as Western skeptics would need for them to shut up a little bit. And it wasn't enough, I think, to satisfy even like the people who are most forgiving to how the counteroffensive went. Even the Ukrainians are admitting that it hasn't gone as much to plan. Well, why is that? Well, why is it so different from the Kharkiv counteroffensive? Well, in the Kharkiv counteroffensive, number one, the Russians had no clue it was coming. The Russians did not know the Kharkiv counteroffensive was coming. They had poorly staffed the area around it. The line was extremely thin. The staff that they did have there had no clue what they were doing, not very experienced. They had very few people up there that were experienced soldiers, like special forces, that could actually, really knew what they were doing. And so when the Ukrainians added pressure and the line broke, they had nothing to respond with. And that's why they could march all the way up to Kupiansk in 3.5 weeks. Now, when you're talking about Zaporozhye, we're talking about a year to prep it with mines, dragon's teeth, anti-tank ditches, trenches, just a whole host of artillery, pre-calculating the artillery's coordinates. You have all this prep because the Ukrainians have to go through Zaporozhye unless they're going to do a river crossing, which is an extremely dangerous operation to do a river crossing. Because all the same issues that the Russians face with logistics while trying to hold Kherson, the Ukrainians would also face trying to create a bridgehead. So they knew that they were most likely going to come through Zaporozhye, so they had the time to prepare, and they knew to properly staff the area. And due to, again, how a lot of this aid, I think, was slow rolled, they had more time than I even think they might have estimated to prepare it. because we were waiting like the last month or two before they started. We were like, man, it's taking a while. And Zelensky said, even publicly said, yeah, it's taking a while, but we want to make sure we're properly prepared. And that was because they didn't have the gear yet. We would confirm gear like months, and it would take months and months and months for the gear actually to get there. And it wasn't just us; it was also a lot of European powers. But
exactly.
But I think that's why it's ended the way it has. Well, it hasn't ended the way it has. It isn't over. Let me be clear. Even the article, even the U.S. Intel article that everyone's talking about, even it says that it isn't over and something could still happen. The Russians have taken tremendous damage in this counteroffensive. The counter battery fire that the Russians have been putting out have been damaged heavily. I've heard some reports saying that the amount of counter artillery, counter battery fire that's been taken out is like double what is usually taken out in the same time period. That they've really improved on that. So I do think there's some things that have been successful, but ultimately the way that a lot of the analysts are going to talk about this on CNN and MSNBC isn't going to be about how much damage was done to the Russian like units and how degraded they were and how long they can stand next year because of how much damage they took. It's going to be how much land did you take? And that's I think how the analysts and how the news channels are going to talk about it. And so that's going to hurt, I think, the perception of how Ukraine's perception.
It seems kind of like a lazy way to do analysis then, doesn't it? If you're not like those people that do a big time analysis for places and are the ones kind of dictating how the energy is in terms of news articles saying it's going too slow. I feel like, some people are going into it and getting the nitty gritty of showing exactly, the reasoning for why it's slow. It's multiple reasons, like we had mentioned at the start. The mining and the artillery that's coming in on those positions, like you had just mentioned as well, preparing this counteroffensive all winter. The Russians are pushing on Bakhmut for 10 months. And while they were pushing on those 5 kilometers over in Bakhmut for like 10 months, they were also preparing those defensive positions because, Ukraine was just trying to defend Bakhmut. There was nothing really else going on. We had some activities up in Kupiansk, and they were pushing towards Svadova, Kreminna. The Russians are over in that area now, but it was, it wasn't like we were seeing the Russians build these positions, and I just wish the West was faster with the aid drops that we were waiting for. And like you had said, once we had got to the point where, it was May time. It was like late April, May, when we were like, okay, when is this going to start? Like, okay, we're waiting for it to start. And then also, I believe they were able to build some defensive lines there as well. And you had talked about it, and we'll talk about it later on tonight, chat, about the article about the intelligence saying that Ukraine will fail to meet the goal of getting to Melitopol before the end of this year. But that doesn't mean that the counteroffensive is all lost. It's just a major city goal of getting this land bridge will not go under Ukraine control for this year.
I do agree with you on how the war has been reported on. I'm not happy with how the war has been reported on. Of course, that's not universal. I think there's good reporters on this, but a lot of it I've been very upset with. There's been very little accountability for when the journalists mess up. A great example of this would be, I don't want to pick on the righties too much, but Fox News, I think, is one of the worst examples of this, where they enabled their hosts to lie about the war time and time again, never issued corrections, wouldn't even attempt to issue correction, just like pretend it didn't happen, even though it happened multiple times on the show. Talked about it last time was on Good Morning Kiev, but it's a great example. Tucker Carlson, most popular news show in America, saying that for every single Russian that dies, 7 Ukrainians die. Ridiculous lie, based in absolutely nothing. Saw some like photoshopped documents of the Jack Textera leaks. That's the only place he could have gotten it from. He repeats it on his show. RFK repeats it a week later on his show. Fox never issues a correction to this day, even after they kicked him off his program. Right? Mm-hmm. After they're trying to pretend, no, we're different now. We're not lying after this lawsuit. We're taking it seriously. They're still engaging in this type of behavior. And then I see how aid is viewed in the United States. And I think if the #1 talk show in America has Tucker Carlson saying, Ukrainians just dying left and like 7 Ukrainians for every Russian that dies. Well, if you believe that, then you're going to say, well, obviously the Ukrainians can't win because Russia has much more people. But that wasn't the case. The Jack Textera documents actually said for every Ukrainian that dies, 2.5 Russians die. Where it's exact opposite of the spectrum. Or, for example, RFK goes on the most popular podcast in America, Joe Rogan Experience, and says $1.8 trillion has been spent on the war in Ukraine. Complete fairy dust. He is
fairy tales.
I wish I had the acid that man was taking. It must be exquisite. It's impossible. And I see that, and it's hard for me to believe that the reason we have seen support for Ukraine peter out has not been affected by the amount of lies and disinformation that has not gone pushed back upon. And there was a recent poll that was done that really opened my eyes on this. I think it was done by the Reagan Institute, which, I mean, I'm not a big fan of them, but they're the only ones that did this data, so I gotta use it, and it makes sense, and I hope other institutes study it as well. They would take the data where they would say, okay, what do you think about sending more aid to Ukraine? And it would be basically Americans were 50-50. 50 were like, yeah, you know what? I support democracy, or, you know, I think it'll help us in the long run. I think it supports our interests. Others are like, it's a waste of money, yada, yada. Very few actually supported Russia, right? So it seemed like the biggest concern was like our funds were either being misused or that, you know, it was all a waste of money. There was very few people who actually supported Russia. But once you started to inform those people about the situation on the ground, when you tell them, actually, Ukraine controls 83% of their territory. Did you know that? Did you know that this is how much Russian equipment is lost? Once you start to inform them, you saw 18-point jumps in support from Ukraine, going from 50% to 70% overall. Republicans went from like 30% to 51%. Democrats, higher than ever. Even independents skyrocketed. And so that shows that the more informed the voting base is, and that's when democracies are the best, is when they have an informed voting pool. That's when they can make the best decisions. When the voters are informed, they support Ukraine. When voters are misinformed, they don't support Ukraine. I think that says something about the legitimacy of Ukraine's struggle.
100% it does. And it falls back to, and I'm glad that, you know, platform like yours exists, or like ours exists, that try to fight through this bullshit in this time that we're in, where, I mean, and people will fall back to just saying, well, it's my free speech to say so. And it's like, well, I mean, you can still get a free speech to push back on it too, and try to hold your misinformed speech and your speech that's trying to trick people, you know, and we can push back on that. And I'm glad that we're able to do so, and do the best we can to do so. You have a really quick little for our little commercial break for you, is you have a vest fundraiser, correct, going on?
I have I don't officially, because I always feel bad. I have this feeling anytime I ask for like money in relation to the war for anything, I always feel bad because I always think about the other people who probably need it more. But I never made it an official fundraiser for that reason. But on my stream, I have this fundraiser where I'm trying to raise money for body armor. I've always rented body armor from like journalist organizations that have been very helpful. But I've been going so frequently to the front line that I've been holding it longer than I should, and I don't want to strain these organizations, so I've made the decision that I'm going to buy it myself. And so we've raised $460 so far. I still am going to need some more moolah to be able to get a plate for both sides, plate carrier, and a helmet, so I can get back out there. Because I really want to get back out there and film with my own body armor. Plus, if I have my own body armor, I can customize it, which I'm excited for.
Yeah, you got to have your own body armor. It's super, super nice. So there you go, guys. Again, with Dylan, I feel you're different though, because you're getting out there yourself. You know, you're trying to get the story. You're not. That's
true. People tell me that, and this is the thing. People have also told me that has convinced me a little bit. Whereas, like, you assume that if you didn't ask for the donation, they would give it to someone else. Where a lot of people just not give a donation. Period. And that I think was the main thing that convinced me. So if anyone wants to help me fundraise for body armor, so I can get that, so I don't blow up, that'd be very helpful. You can go to DylanBurnsTV, that's my website, and you can donate, sub there, it'd be very helpful.
That would be very, very awesome. And then plug for what we have going on quick with Ukraine and the NAFO 69th Sniffing Brigade, which we got to get you on to one of these too.
I was invited.
Eventually.
I was invited to participate in one of these fundraisers. I got to do one of these fundraisers when I get the chance.
Yeah, you do. So we're at, for our chat, we're at 38% complete with our 5th truck now, where you got to get 16,000 euro. And again, these trucks are Kazovac vehicles. They're used by Ukrainian soldiers on the front lines that go in and out. I delivered our 2nd truck to Ukraine. That's how I got to meet Dylan in person. Delivered it from Estonia to Ukraine, and then hung out in Kyiv. And I'm going to do the same thing again in September. All right, I'm going to deliver the 4th and the 5th vehicles, because we're going to have this 5th one done, right, chat? We're going to get this done by the end of September, or by the end of August, so that way I can deliver this one in September as well, because I'm coming back, which I can't wait to do. It was
Excited
such
to
a
have you
great.
back. Do you
Dude, yeah,
plan? Do
we're
you
gonna
plan to do anything? Any field work? Do you plan? Do you have gonna get press credentials?
I could ask you maybe to how I can go about some of those routes to do so. I do know that we have plans to get closer to the east. NAFO Brigade's getting in Kostianivka now, just by Chasiv Yar. So I do want to get out there. I do want to. I just need to know how to get, how to do it.
Okay, well, I
The
can.
route.
You DM me. I can tell you everything you need to know about press credentials, stuff like that. How to get it. There's like, it's all just bureaucracy. If you know how to manage the bureaucracy, then you should be fine.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, in the US, all I had to do is just make up my own. That's what I did. I got my own.
You just put press on yourself
ID.
and boom, you're press.
Yeah, hell yeah. I got into everything. I was in all the press pools of everything. It was cool. I thought that was important, but I figured out anyone can do it. But yeah, for the Ukraine though, I know I need extra credentials and shit. So I'm gonna need to link up with you. How many times have you been back and forth from the east or have you been to the south?
I don't know how many times. I mean, I've been to Zaporozhye front line a few times. That's the southern front line.
Mhm.
I've been offered to go to Odessa. I don't know if I'm going to go to Odessa. There's just not much to do in Odessa that I'm interested in journalistically outside of the mafia, but that's something post-war I think would be more interested to cover. The Odessan mafia, which has a really tight grip down there. And I think I could cover the attacks on the grain storage, but Odessa is the one place I still think I want to go. I also want to go to Carpathian Mountains. I haven't done much touristy stuff. I want to do eventually at some point. I got to do some of the touristy stuff because at some point it's like, damn, this is such a beautiful country, but I'm spending all my time looking at burnt out buildings and like destroyed landscapes and talking to people talking about losing all their family members. I'm gonna go to the Carpathian Mountains and just getting drunk with friends or something.
That's how I felt when I got there and meeting and talking with Ukrainians, and they're like, "Look at all these cool places we have," and like just show me pictures of the mountains. They're like, when you come next, you have to go here, but I'm like, "Oh, but I have to go report on the war." It's like, tourism or the war. It's like, dang. But like, I definitely probably gonna have to take a trip to Ukraine specifically to do tourism because there's so many beautiful locations in the country. Like you had mentioned, those mountains. I want to go see the mountains so bad.
I had some of the best times I had was hanging out with like ambulance drivers and like medical crews and like doing barbecues and just drinking and doing shots on the riverside of the Dnepr. That was some of my favorite times in the country because you really get to know people through that. And the thing that's good about that, and because I drank a lot with the deminers, is I think it's important for journalism as well, is that through doing that, people open up. And when people trust you like that, they're going to trust you with a lot more of their honest opinion about how things are going, a lot more about how they view the war. Maybe they'll be more willing to share, and you'll get a better, more human and personal story. That I remember one of the things that I think that me, spending that time with the deminers, I got a few interviews that I thought were very good, very personal, or at least it touched on topics that they might have not been willing to share to somebody who didn't spend so much time with them. I remember once there was something that probably to most people would have sounded weird if they heard it outside of the time we had spent together, where they told me that demining and mine laying, specifically the mine laying, like laying down bombs, is an art form. They told me it was an art form because of the back and forth. I think I already told you this on the Good Morning Kiev show.
On the Morning Kiev, yeah, you can repeat it though.
But it's an art form because the deminer has to be the mine layer, the sapper, the Russian sapper has to be extremely creative if they're a good sapper. Most of them just go by the book. They just look at the book. It says place mine down, do this. They place mine down. They just do one after the other in rows. That's how most of them do it. But if they're good at what they do, if they've been doing it for a while, they got some skill at it, they're gonna put down a mine. They're gonna stand up. They're gonna look around for any other locations, thinking, if somebody set off this mine, where would they run to? If somebody was going to try to charge this or try to destroy it from a distance, where would they run off to? If somebody got hurt here and they tried to crawl away, where would they go? And where can I attach a wire to this? So if they try to dismantle it, then it'll go off. And then the deminer has to play a cat and mouse game, a back and forth almost in the same way you would imagine like two boxers in the ring would like have a back and forth as they try different strategy and tactics. And that's how he described it to me, like an art form. And when I thought about it like that, I was like, wow, it really is like a cat and mouse game of them constantly trying to outcompete each other, which was also why a lot of the footage I took of their demining efforts, it was very difficult for anyone to ever be convinced that it should be released. And the reason why was they were scared that any footage the Russians could use and it could assist them in the cat and mouse game because they would learn their new tactics.
That makes perfect sense with the operational security around it and the mindset that goes into that. And also they're leaving grenades under them too, right? Like they're trapping them. You had mentioned that a little earlier.
I can tell you
doubled.
I can tell you one particularly horrific example that our teams were experiencing in Kharkiv Oblast while we were there. We had a group of 3 guys get killed. I think 4 injured, 5 injured, in the Kharkiv Oblast near us because they had stacked 5 anti-tank mines on top of each other. So that means when the first one they tried to remove on the top, all of the 4 below it went off, created a massive explosion, killing 3 of them basically instantly and maiming the other 4. And that's meant specifically to kill demining crews. That's why they do that.
So you can get a bigger radius around it. So you don't just get the initial guy that's trying to personally work on it. You get everyone. That just shows you the orc mentality of the Russians.
And after that happened, there were some TM-62 anti-tank mines we were interacting with. And what did the demining crews with me do? They demined it at a huge distance with like rope, and they tied something on top of it so they could pull it off from a distance. So if something went off, no one would get hurt. And that's that cat and mouse game. I just wish. I mean, I can see how someone could say it's an art form, or I just wish lives weren't on the line.
Right. Exactly. Have you ever been under artillery while you were out there reporting?
Yeah, a few times.
A few times. Can you explain what that's like?
Man, so I thought I would be scared when it was getting shelled, but I'm only scared when I'm not doing anything and I'm being shelled. When I'm doing something, if I can preoccupy my mind with something, whether it's like running somewhere or taking cover somewhere, but anytime I like stay centered in one place for too long, even if I'm just riding in a van away from an area that's getting shelled, it gets very scary because you start thinking about the situation you're in. You start thinking about like exactly what's happening to you. And so like emotionally, as long as I can keep myself preoccupied, I've been able to deal with it quite well. But it's very strange because it can just happen literally out of nowhere. Because with rockets, you kind of like, you start to hear it come in. You have a more of a warning, unless we're talking like one of those like hypersonic missiles. But in most cases, you can kind of hear it. It sounds kind of like a rocket engine. And I've had instances where I've had enough time to take cover. But with the artillery, unless you hear that whistle, you're not going to be giving any signal whatsoever.
Loved your interview.
You're not going to get any signal outside of that whistle.
Slava,
if it
Ukraine.
is directly, sorry, so one of your guys came over and donated, and oh my gosh, you gave me $100. It's very nice.
Let's go. GG's, let's go.
Mark Redacted.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Hey, let's go, Mark.
That. Thank you, Mark.
Good job, Mark. Let's go.
My goodness. Now we're past the 50% mark for the body armor. Thank you. Man, I didn't.
Let's go.
What was I saying? Oh yeah, it's for me. The first time I got shelled directly was when I was in Mykolaiv during the Kherson counteroffensive, and we were given no warning outside of, "Hey Dylan, I think that counteroffensive has started." Bullshit. Walk outside, and the shell falls like 400 feet from us. Not 400 feet, 40 feet. Sorry, like 40 feet to 50 feet from us, and there was no warning there. It was just explosion, 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 and I didn't hear any of the whistling. And it was just happening all around you, and there was no way to know where it was going to land. So all you could really do is try to take cover and hope for the best. But on the second time that I was shelled, it was when I was when I was in Kherson with the aid workers that we got shelled. And I could actually hear the whistle as it came in, which gave me enough time to throw myself on the ground. It's really nerve-wracking. But if I've been able to deal with it, I think, well enough, as long as I can distract myself from what's happening. I remember that time I actually started singing a song to myself to help me.
Yeah, what song?
There's this old paratrooper song called "Glory, Glory." What a hell of a way to die. I don't know why I started humming that to myself, but that was the song I started humming to myself.
Oh yeah, it's a good song though. It gets you warm and fuzzy. And I went to airborne school, which I didn't make it through though. I got 41 clubbed, which is you got to do when you go to airborne school for real. You got to do the 18 to 21-year-old PT test standard. And my instructor, when I left training, was like, when you get to airborne school down there, make sure you're not in the back of any line because they usually like the back couple in each line they'll just fail just to cut numbers because not everybody can pass airborne school. Otherwise it would look too easy, right? As it's not that difficult of a school. It's really, really not. So, I mean, I went there doing my push-ups, 41, 41, 41, and just got fucking failed. But
Damn.
it's all yeah. So, because you only need 42 push-ups to pass, you got to do 42 push-ups in 2 minutes, sitting there bouncing my chest off the plank, 41, 40, done, ruined my whole life. No kidding, it didn't ruin my life, but I got sent to Alaska instead. I was supposed to go to Fort Benning, Georgia, or no, excuse me, Fort Bragg, South Carolina, and I got sent to Alaska instead. But
I don't know. I mean,
that...
Alaska is a beautiful state. You know, I just got you got.
Oh.
Would you prefer Alaska or South Carolina?
I actually am not. I'm not upset about Alaska anymore. Like originally, you know, when I was 19 years old, so I'm like, oh fuck, Alaska, bro. Like I live in Minnesota, so I mean, colder weather. You know what I mean? Like extremely cold. But I am very happy I went up there now after my time there because it is beautiful. The state's gorgeous. It's just really cold.
Did you get to do a lot of nature stuff?
Oh yeah, that's the only thing we could do. I mean, the bars, but you get tired of that. It's the same people. There's like in Fairbanks, it's a smaller town. It's the second largest city in Alaska. You have Anchorage and Fairbanks, but Fairbanks is up in a valley up here, up in the valley, and Fort Wainwright is like the biggest part of the city where the military is. So it's like go ahead.
There is one artillery story that I could tell you that I think really was the thing that scared me the most about artillery when I think about it the longest. During that trip to Mykolaiv, we were supposed to drop off some aid at like a local like dog shelter near the riverbank because a lot of people had abandoned their dogs and there was very few people taking care of them. So a lot of them were injured and a lot of them, they didn't want them running around getting hurt, and so they were trying to collect them and feed them, and so we're bringing them aid. And we slept on basically the Dnieper River right across from the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. In the middle of the night during the start of the Kherson counteroffensive.
Wow.
And the amount of explosions I heard that night I can never compare it to anything ever. It's impossible to compare it, but it was as if like, I don't know how to describe how overwhelming the barrage was. I remember counting, I was woken up in the middle of the night multiple times by how heavy it was. It looked like volcanoes were erupting next to the power plant. I counted 50 explosions in a 30-second time period. It didn't help that also a thunderstorm started at the exact same time as well.
How did you tell the difference between the thunder and there's a big difference?
It's very hard to tell the difference sometimes. I tried to tell the difference. You can sometimes tell the difference because of the echo. At least, or I'm just completely bullshitting, but I've noticed that personally. But in this case, it was so bad and also terrifying because we were just in the middle of a field in the dark in a farm field, and we're literally just seeing like Ukrainian military patrols like going around us constantly, and it was 50 explosions in a 30-second time period, and it almost sounded like if somebody just took drums and went like and that's how it sounded next to the largest nuclear power plant in Europe.
And the West just watches it happen. Oh, hey, hold on. Hey, Russia, you want to be the president of the UN Security Council again? Come on down. UN's a joke. The UN watches. So we're watching right now, and then we're watching the counteroffensive around Robotny, and then also Ukrainians just liberated Rozatny. I struggle saying some of these villages.
Don't even ask me. I just say my favorite village got liberated.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. You foresee more liberations coming, or what phase are we in right now?
There probably will be more. Probably be more villages liberating. The Ukrainians are trying to build upon it. The question is if we're going to see any major breakthroughs. That's the stuff that everybody's really wondering. And I mean, it seems that in one area, they've somewhat gotten through the first line of defenses, but then there's still two more lines of defenses. And even if you get through the two more lines of defenses, there's also entrenched cities behind that, which are going to be full of Russian soldiers. And so there's still like a lot of work to do. Most of the work that has been done, though, like I said earlier, I don't think the media is properly covering, is how much they've degraded and destroyed Russian counter battery fire, which means that Ukrainian artillery can operate more freely. And this is an artillery war. 60 to 70% of deaths in this war is artillery. And so having that happen and the Ukrainians being able to counter Russian artillery more is really positive news. And so that gives me some hope that I think it's still possible that we could see some really positive developments. And I also do want to say that even if they don't completely like cut off the Russian land bridge, if they're able to get in within a few miles of locations like Mariupol, they could still heavily damage Russian shipments into cities like that. And considering how much resistance is in that city, I still think that could be seen as a real victory, and that should be I think that should be highlighted if they're able to strain Russian shipments into Mariupol and weaken their control in the city, because that is one way to cut off the land bridge. And if you can even strain their land bridge, because if you've got, you know, storm shadow strikes on the Kerch Bridge, artillery strikes on the roads in the Mariupol, I mean, that's really going to strain the Russian logistical lines. And so I think even if they don't cut off the land bridge, they still have ways to make this beneficial for Ukraine in the long term.
We're also not factoring too of how weak the Russians are when their lines do get cracks in them. Just like in the Northeast, I know they have stronger defensive lines built, and they got cope triangles out there, cope pyramids, and other trenches dug out there now. But Ukraine, as soon as they pierce through, at least, I mean, when you look at the map, I got the map up, like 4 sections of Zaporizhia and one part of Donetsk. They just need to get through about 4 parts of there, and then once the Russians find out that the Ukrainians are behind them across, and maybe if they say it's a certain front that the Ukrainians themselves haven't reached yet, once the Russians find out the Ukrainians are behind them, they're going to turn tail and run, like they always do. You know, as soon as they get the news that the Ukrainians there's nothing behind them, you know, I think we're going to see the front crack more than we're seeing right now. We're just not seeing it yet.
I hope so. I think fear is a terrible motivator, and so that is true that they could retreat, but they're not only afraid of the Ukrainians. A lot of them are also afraid of their command, desperately afraid of their command. Wagner, for example, always had a very notorious reputation for what they would do to somebody that they would call deserters, or people who retreat when they're not supposed to retreat. They beat them to death with sledgehammers. And I remember I had this interview with a right sector fighter about Wagner, and he wanted to dispel the idea that they, that Wagner are just they don't know what they're doing, or they're all completely inexperienced, or they're not good fighters. He was like, a lot of them are not the most skilled fighters, but they're sent out specifically to soften up the positions before they send over the guys from Syria, before they send over the guys from the Central African Republic, people that have like sometimes half a decade to a decade of military experience and are the real killers, right? The people who also do the sledgehammering, right? So those soldiers that were sent though in those first waves, when I asked him about them, like, you know, how do they perform? What do you think of them? He was like, they are more terrified, and they're not of the people behind them than they are of the people in front of them. And so if that is true, that I do wonder, depending on who is in command or how good control that they have of command, whether that's going to be a deciding factor on whether or not they retreat or they stay in their line. If they weren't afraid of their command, I would 100% be willing to say, yeah, I think they would retreat pretty quickly. But with how Russian military culture is, I'm not 100% sure. But it's a question of basically, I think, making them more afraid of the Ukrainians than they are of their own command. That's the way you would make them retreat. So like, oh, this is certain death, we have to run. We might get sledgehammered, but we're going to blow up if we stay here.
When they see Ukraine get some more victories stacking up here, because it's been kind of like a couple months of, I mean, victory here and there, but I'm really thinking like Robotny is about to crack 4 villages south of Bakhmut that the Ukrainians are directly on, or are cracking, that they're either getting into. So I feel that the Ukrainians start stacking up some more liberations, even if it's not just like a a large swath push, but it's just like news comes in like, oh, we lost another one. It could contribute because also the Russian morale isn't the greatest. I mean, it's their only motivation to stay in the position really is if you leave, you're going to get, like you had mentioned, the fear of getting shot, from their conscript commander. Is that greater than the Ukrainian coming at them, on the other side?
I wonder about Russian morale, because I know Russian morale is suffering. I wonder though how much Putin's crackdown on the military bloggers, on the people who have been more critical of them, has. I know it didn't address any of the problems, because I see all the same complaints still on the military bloggers. They haven't addressed any of the issues, all of the same complaints that they have about the Russian military and how they're performing and how they're not being properly supplied and how Shoigu is a bastard and how Gerasimov is a bastard and they all gonna waste glorious Novorossiya, blah 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 blah. I see those posts still coming in, and so I have a good reason to believe that the morale is bad. I guess it's a question of whether or not Putin's kind of like media crackdown on dissent is going to have any effect on morale at all. My thing that I'm wondering is if they crack down on any dissent whatsoever, I don't understand how they're going to ever have their government pressured to even fix the problems that they do have. Because if there's no squeaky wheel, which wheel do you go and oil? Not to mention the fact that not only is that going to possibly undermine their ability to actually fix the problems that they have, if let's say that there is a breakthrough and they had the whole time saying no breakthrough, and they're not communicating what's really going on. If you're a Russian soldier and you don't know what's going on, and suddenly there's Ukrainian soldiers everywhere and they haven't been telling you what's actually happening, that can actually terrify you to a point that it's a complete break, which is why I think transparency and clear communication is important, but that is not how the Russians operate.
No, absolutely not. It's all about fear. All is fine. Don't worry. Everything is according to plan. It's all going great. I mean, it's the Russians are clowns.
That's what happened in the Kharkiv Oblast too. That's what happened during the Kharkiv counteroffensive, is that they were not completely transparent exactly what was going on, and then all of a sudden there'd be people in your Russian soldiers occupying a random village, and the Ukrainians are there when you thought they were 3 days away.
Literally, 100% like that. Well, buddy, it was great chatting with you. It was awesome. We definitely should do this again. It sounds like, we kind of went off into some other topics for a little bit, but it sounds like we could be talking about a lot more than just Ukraine too, whenever you would like to, and have a discussion. Do Fridays work for you? We could just do this on Fridays.
Actually, unironically, I used to do this thing, and my chat hates me for it because I stopped doing the map updates because it's hard to keep track with every single update while also trying to concentrate on the stories on the ground. So I think being with somebody that I know is a map nerd, right? And I say that respectfully. I think my community would like that. You know what? I think we'll touch base next Friday.
I think we could definitely benefit from the knowledge that on the ground, because I'm trying to be like you. I'm trying to get out there, but you've already have the experience, and you're out there and getting the word out. And so make sure everyone, I have his Twitch link in my description, or it's in the description, but it's also in the chat and it's pinned, so you guys could click that. He's live on Twitch right now. Actually, it sounds like his chat's pretty cool. You got a map emoji over there.
Yeah,
awesome.
We would play the Door to Explorer, the map song that I'm the map.
Yeah, you play the map song.
We'd play that before we would go through the map. That's part of the reason I don't do it anymore. It got too annoying and I got too addicted with it.
I play Metal Gear Solid music in the background when I'm doing my map updates. It's
See, awesome. That's a lot cooler than what I got stuck with. Maybe I'd be doing map time. I got Metal Gear Solid music.
All right, buddy. Sounds like all right. Well, we'll have further discussions. Lots going on. We can do news. We can do. You sounds like we both have the same. We both started similarly in the U.S. with our streams, and it sounds like you're understanding of what I'm understanding. So we'll be able to contribute a lot or collaborate a lot, even especially when the election's coming up, because you're staying in Kyiv you're staying in Ukraine. For here on out, all right? No.
I'm coming back, and I gotta go back for Christmas. I gotta spend.
Okay, come back for Christmas.
I love my grandparents. They raised me. I gotta be there for Christmas. It's a promise I gotta keep.
I feel that one, but then you're going back to Ukraine, all right?
Yep. Then I'm going right back to Ukraine. Yep. I'm like,
so I'll be I'll be your guy here on the ground for U.S. news then, because that's what I get out there and talk to voters and shit, and ask them questions. And I got coughed on around QAnon and all types of stuff, dude. Like I had my mask on and everything, and these people did not do that. But it is what it was. Raw COVID, but they're like literally coughing on each other and shit. It's like, you guys, it's like we're out here raw COVID. This was before the vaccine or anything. And it's like, you guys are just like playing around with it like that,
And the thing
toasty
is,
brains.
those QAnon people are also like usually the most susceptible groups. We're talking like a lot of them are very elderly. A lot of them are up there in age. Many of them have pre-existing medical conditions. A lot of them are overweight. And so you add all these factors. They're like literally the worst group in the country to be saying, I'm not going to get the medicine that targets my group of people the worst and is the most fatal for all the traits that I have.
Yep. Horrible. All right, buddy. Thank you for chatting. See you on see you next Friday.
I will. See you next Friday. Can I just give a quick shout out? Monday, I'm releasing an article with Offbeat Research. It's going to be an interview with a Crimean soldier who was displaced from Crimea as they were a child and now trying to release their home. Hope you guys go check it out. And check out my video I'm going to be releasing on my main channel, DylanBurnsTV, where I break down a Russian war crime in Kherson that I documented. It's going to be released in the next week or two, so please keep your eyes out for that. Thank you so much for having me on.
Hell yes. All right, buddy. See you next week.
Bye-bye.